Matthew 26 and Mark 14. Well, we resume the last day, really, of Jesus' earthly life in our reading. Jesus moves up to the room of what we call the last Passover. I'd recommend not calling it the Lord's Supper. My study Bible has the phrase something about instituting the Lord's Supper. Well, let's keep those ideas separate because Paul will in 1 Corinthians 11, and of course we'll get there. This is simply, in the sight of the people who witnessed it, that is the disciples, the last Passover of Jesus. And let's talk about the meaning there. We, of course, hear during this meal, very traditional meal, a traditional meal in the life of the Jew, in which they celebrate deliverance, the deliverance of Israel from Egypt. It's the greatest story that Israel has in their arsenal when it comes to God's faithfulness to them as a nation. Notice again, and I think it's very important to catch, when we're talking Passover, we're not talking deliverance from hell. We're not talking getting right with God. This is a tradition to be celebrated for those who already were right with God. And so whatever happens in this story, and let's go to it. Jesus, in that moment of instituting meaning into this last Passover, he mentions, and this is the shock value of the moment, my blood, as opposed to the lamb's blood of the Passover meal. They were to celebrate, and this shocked the men, I believe, my blood. And of course the idea there, and he even says this is the new covenant. Now, that of course is pulling on the old covenant that was instituted in the days of the Exodus. And here's where he says it is shed. My blood is shed for the remission of the sins of many. Now, we'll talk about this when we get into the book of Acts and into the letters of the New Testament. This word is often reserved for the polloi, that is those outside the Jewish nation, the Gentile. And I'd recommend that what's going on here is not Jesus shedding his blood so that people can become right with God. That's never been the story before. What we're having is a picture of a sacrifice, of course, but now it's Jesus who is being sacrificed, and he is shedding his blood for the Gentile. That's the newness of this covenant. This one was for the Jew. Now we have a new covenant being instituted that will include Gentiles. Well, clearly we've been through that story many times in Jesus' teaching, and now it's being presented in, shall we say, kind of a dark form at a moment when the men were not obviously taking notes with pen and paper about what this means in the future. This was said in passing, I believe, in the moment of celebrating the Passover meal, but it was memorable, and the men remembered it, and that's why it's in our text. And I think the meaning will become more clear as we move into the book of Acts. But what I do want to move our minds to then in our reading today is this moment then as Jesus takes the men into the Garden of Gethsemane, a traditional spot for him to probably pray and be alone during his earlier ministry, but there's where he goes now during these last moments. And it says this in 26:39, Matthew, Jesus fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, nevertheless not as I will, but as you will. This is the ultimate conversation of a loyalist, where we are questioning. He is questioning the will of him versus the Father. And again, we go all the way back to the book of Job in our biblical story to celebrate what loyalty looks like. It does not mean you don't question God. It means that when push comes to shove, you learn to trust in a God that you know loves you. And I believe that's what Jesus is struggling with here. This is not what I want. Who wants to go through what Jesus knew what was about to happen? But and I think there was this pause. Nevertheless, not my will but thine. Somehow he understands from the Father that what is coming is the Father's will. And here's where I think, and let me close with this, here's where I believe we need to make a difference. And theologically, there is something to be thought through here. What Jesus was not praying about, and I would even even say not agonizing about, was his death. Because the prayer, and it was said 3 times, right? Each time with Jesus coming back with the same idea. I'm going to go with your will, Father, not my own. He had seen death before. His father died. His friend Lazarus died. People die all the time. If Jesus had lived long enough, he would have died as well. So the question really was not the death of Jesus that he was struggling with. It was the idea of a painful death. So I would recommend that that the conversation of this Gethsemane agony was not about why do I need to die. It's why do I need to die painfully? What is the purpose in your will, Father, that I go through a painful and a very painful death? And that's why I think when we come to the question theologically of the meaning of Jesus' death, which we'll have, again, many more opportunities to talk about, it will be the subject of Paul and other New Testament writers at length. What I recommend that we cannot do is stop with the question of why did Jesus die. We need to move it into the question that Jesus himself is posing here with the Father. It's why does Jesus need to die painfully? What purpose is pain or suffering in the larger story of God? And what can Jesus teach us in this moment that will have meaning for the Christian as well?